Hillsborough disaster. On the 15th of April 1989, Liverpool and Nottingham Forest supporters gathered at Hillsborough Stadium for an FA Cup semi-final. South Yorkshire police were responsible for crowd control. As thousands of Liverpool fans arrived late due to transportation delays, officers opened Exit Gate C to relieve congestion outside the stadium. Instead of directing fans evenly to side pens with available space, police allowed them to funnel into already overcrowded central pens behind the goal. Within minutes, supporters at the front were crushed against steel fencing designed to prevent hooliganism. Officers initially treated the unfolding catastrophe as a pitch invasion rather than a medical emergency. Ambulances were delayed. Emergency response inside the stadium was fragmented and poorly coordinated. 97 people eventually died as a result of the crush. In the immediate aftermath, senior officers briefed media outlets with claims that fans were drunk and violent, shifting blame onto the victims. These narratives shaped public perception for decades. Subsequent investigations and inquests found that police failures in planning, crowd monitoring, and decision-making were central causes. In 2016, a jury concluded the victims were unlawfully killed. The disaster was not an unpredictable riot. It was a chain of controllable decisions, each narrowing the space for survival. The Stephen Lawrence investigation. On the 22nd of April 1993, 18-year-old Stephen Lawrence was attacked by a group of white youths while waiting for a bus in southeast London. He was stabbed and died shortly after. Witnesses identified suspects quickly. Names were given to police within hours, yet arrests were delayed. Surveillance was poorly executed. Evidence was mishandled. Coordination between officers broke down almost immediately. The initial investigation suffered from basic procedural failures. Officers did not properly search suspects' homes in time. Key witnesses were not treated with urgency or protection. Communication with the Lawrence family was dismissive and at times openly hostile. Behind the operational mistakes was something more structural. The 1999 Macpherson report later concluded that the Metropolitan Police was institutionally racist, meaning its policies, culture, and practices systematically disadvantaged minority communities. For years, no one was convicted. It took nearly 2 decades before 2 of the attackers were finally found guilty in 2012, after advances in forensic science allowed old evidence to be re-examined. The damage extended beyond one family. Public trust fractured. The case became a national reckoning on race, policing, and accountability in Britain. The failure was not only in solving a crime, it was in recognizing whose life demanded urgency. The Uvalde school shooting response. On the 24th of May, 2022, an 18-year-old gunman entered Robb Elementary School in Uvalde and began shooting inside adjoining classrooms. Local police officers arrived within minutes. Some engaged the shooter briefly but retreated after coming under fire. The situation was incorrectly treated as a barricaded suspect scenario rather than an active shooter event, despite ongoing gunfire and 911 calls from children trapped inside. For more than 70 minutes, officers from multiple agencies remained in the hallway. They waited for specialized equipment and a tactical unit. During that time, injured victims received no medical intervention. Parents gathered outside, restrained by police, as information remained fragmented and inconsistent. Investigations later determined that officers had enough personnel and firepower to confront the shooter much earlier. The decision to delay entry was described by state officials as the wrong call. Training protocols emphasizing immediate engagement in active shooter situations were not followed. Communication between agencies was confused, and leadership on scene was unclear. 19 children and 2 teachers were killed. The response became a case study in hesitation under pressure. It raised questions about command structure, preparedness, and the psychological barriers that can override established doctrine. In the end, the timeline became the central fact. The minutes were counted. So was the silence inside the classroom. The Rotherham child exploitation scandal. The Rotherham child exploitation scandal was a prolonged failure by police and local authorities to act on widespread sexual abuse of minors in South Yorkshire between the 1990s and 2010s. For years, vulnerable girls in Rotherham were groomed, trafficked, and abused by organized groups of men. Reports were filed. Social workers raised concerns. Some victims went directly to police. Yet investigations were frequently downgraded or abandoned. Cases were dismissed as consensual relationships, even when the victims were clearly underage. Internal reviews later showed that officers often viewed the girls as troublesome or unreliable. There was also documented reluctance to pursue suspects of Pakistani heritage due to fears of being labeled racist. That hesitation became operational paralysis. Warnings from frontline workers were minimized. Intelligence was not properly shared. Patterns were not connected. In 2014, an independent inquiry led by Professor Alexis J. estimated that at least 1,400 children had been abused over a 1-6-year period. The report described repeated missed opportunities to intervene. It found that leadership failures, poor record-keeping, and a culture of denial allowed exploitation to continue largely unchecked. When arrests and prosecutions finally increased, the damage had already compounded across a generation of victims. Many survivors described reporting their abuse only to be ignored or disbelieved. The institutional failure was not a single misjudgment. It was a sustained absence of protection in plain sight. The Daniel Morgan Murder Investigation. The Daniel Morgan murder investigation was a decades-long failure by British police to solve the 1,987 killing of a private investigator in London. Daniel Morgan was found in a pub car park in Sydenham with an axe embedded in his head. From the beginning, the case was entangled with allegations of police corruption. Morgan had reportedly been investigating corrupt links between officers and criminal networks. Several suspects were identified early, including individuals with connections to serving police officers. Over the next 3 decades, there were 5 separate investigations, multiple arrests, and repeated collapses of prosecutions. Evidence was lost. Sensitive documents disappeared. Officers involved in early inquiries were later accused of obstructing justice. Internal discipline was minimal. Whistleblowers described a culture where loyalty to colleagues outweighed transparency. In 2021, an independent panel concluded that the Metropolitan Police had been institutionally corrupt in its handling of the case. The panel found that the force prioritized protecting its own reputation over uncovering the truth. Morgan's family spent 34 years seeking accountability, navigating a system that seemed structurally resistant to exposing itself. No one has been convicted of his murder. The failure was not only investigative incompetence, it was a pattern of defensiveness that shielded information from scrutiny. Over time, the absence of resolution became its own evidence. The Christchurch Mosque Attack Response Failures. The Christchurch Mosque Attack Response Failures refer to the systemic intelligence and policing gaps preceding the 2019 terrorist attack in New Zealand. On the 15th of March 2019, a gunman attacked 2 mosques in Christchurch, killing 51 people. The immediate armed response was relatively swift by local standards, and the attacker was arrested within minutes of the second shooting. The deeper failure lay before that day. In the years leading up to the attack, New Zealand's security services had focused overwhelmingly on Islamist extremism. Resources, surveillance frameworks, and threat assessments were directed almost entirely toward one category of risk. Meanwhile, right-wing extremist activity online and within fringe communities received comparatively limited scrutiny. The perpetrator had posted manifestos and expressed violent ideology in digital spaces, but he was not on any active watch list. A later royal commission found no evidence that police or intelligence agencies could have definitively prevented the attack with the information they had. However, it concluded that structural blind spots shaped by institutional priorities reduced the likelihood that warning signs would be detected. Community groups had previously expressed concerns about rising Islamophobia, but these warnings did not significantly alter threat modeling. The failure was not a delayed tactical decision. It was a strategic imbalance. The architecture of attention was uneven, and the cost of that imbalance became visible in a matter of minutes. The Toronto Serial Killer Investigation Failures. The Toronto Serial Killer Investigation Failures refer to the prolonged inability of police to connect and act on disappearances linked to Bruce McArthur between 2010 and 2017. Men began vanishing from Toronto's gay village years before an arrest was made. Many were immigrants. Some lacked stable housing. Families and community members reported them missing. Early investigations treated several cases as isolated incidents. Officers suggested that some men had simply left voluntarily. Task forces were created, then scaled back. Leads were pursued, then deprioritized. In 2013, police investigated Bruce MacArthur in connection with an assault but did not pursue stronger charges. By 2016, there were enough similarities between disappearances to form Project Prism, a task force examining possible links. Yet even then, public reassurances were issued stating there was no evidence of a serial killer. Community advocates criticized what they saw as a lack of urgency tied to the victims' identities. MacArthur was not arrested until January 2018, after a separate investigation into an assault led officers to search a property where human remains were later found. He ultimately pleaded guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder. A later independent review concluded that while bias was difficult to quantify, the investigation suffered from communication gaps, flawed risk assessments, and a failure to fully recognize patterns sooner. For years, the disappearances accumulated quietly. The connections existed. They were simply not assembled in time.